Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Colin's Last Stand right here on YouTube. My name is Colin Moriarty. As always, I appreciate your time, and I hope this video finds you and yours very well. Today, I want to talk a little bit about what was going on this past weekend here in the United States, specifically in Virginia, specifically in Charlottesville, Virginia, where thousands of white nationalists, neo-Nazis, these so-called alt-right types, these far right-wing types, really went to battle with some seemingly peaceful protesters. I'm sure Antifa were in there and all of the rest. But nonetheless, it's just another terrible demonstration of where politics in the United States in 2017 has gotten us, with violence and bigotry and racism and identity politics and all of these kinds of things. And you're going to find plenty of hot takes on what happened there, people's written and video opinions and audio opinions in their podcasts of the events as they transpired. I'm not so interested in getting into all of that because I think it's going to be done already. Instead, I want to use it as a way to be able to pivot into a more productive conversation about what's really going on here in the United States and how what happened in Charlottesville is not an isolated incident, is not an incident that is just happening in some sort of vacuum. That really, we shouldn't be so surprised that we've gotten to this point, and it's really terrible, and we should probably do something about it. So, as always, I'll be interested to hear what you think in the comments below after I'm done, but first, let's get into what I have to say to begin with. Without sounding too melodramatic, I can't be the only one who feels like 21st century America is starting to not only feature, but in fact revolve around an all-new, escalating, and increasingly dangerous culture war. A culture war with not one or two extremes, but more sides even. Unholy alliances of ignoramuses and degenerates rallying around stupid, misguided, and often hateful ideologies that cause division, that stoke hatred and othering, that cause pain and anguish. And as we saw this past weekend in Charlottesville, Virginia, this culture war is now costing lives. Charlottesville is a lovely city and a lovely state, but nothing, nobody, and nowhere is immune from the far-reaching effects of 2017's identitarian political struggle, no matter the shade of gray in question. Worse yet, it's an identitarian political struggle that most good and decent people do not feed into and want no part of whatsoever. Yet everyone is ultimately getting sucked into this madness. What happened in Virginia was nothing short of disgusting, no matter how you cut it. An emboldened far-right and its cohorts chose to rally in Charlottesville ostensibly because of the removal of a statue of General Robert E. Lee, a man with an incredible amount of blood on his hands, a traitor who makes Benedict Arnold seem downright pedestrian. That right there should show you the kind of people we're dealing with in this particular case. Men and some women too, who took to the streets because the statue of a Confederate general who should have been hanged by his neck in 1865 was removed from its place of honor to perhaps be placed in a museum or a private collection where it actually belongs. Robert E. Lee betrayed his country and everybody in it, and he betrayed his conscience too, which is exactly what the thousands of white supremacists and neo-Nazis did by showing up this weekend, fueling an increasingly out of control, increasingly tense situation. Make no mistake about it, these people are bigots. They are racist, they are xenophobic, and they are filled with fear and hatred in equal measure. If we're to call cars ramming into people in European capitals terrorism, then a car ramming into protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia is also an act of terrorism, conducted by a terrorist, even if his skin is white instead of brown. See, here in America, these folks have every right to assemble. They have every right to wave flags of historical losers like the Confederate flag and the swastika. They have the right to say hateful things and to hold hate in their hearts. I know you already know this, but these are rights worth protecting for all of us, because one small erosion could turn into something we cannot control. From a legal perspective, people's feelings are of little relevance in this argument when it comes to nasty words and terrible symbols. But when push literally comes to shove, the calculus changes. When someone loses a life, when someone puts their hands on someone else at a political rally, period, we have to start asking ourselves some big questions and draw some obvious conclusions. I feel I did just that. Saturday, before spending a wonderful phoneless, internetless, communicationless afternoon at the beach, I tweeted this out, noting that the variety of violence and bigotry on display in Charlottesville is just another reminder that normal people need to band together. I made a plea for the adults to stand up. But this is 2017 and Twitter is on the internet, where outrage and only outrage remains en vogue. So obviously some people got upset. I don't know how this tweet could possibly make anyone mad, but it did. Because today, politics is a binary team sport, where showing off your feathers like a peacock is all that matters. Like heat-seeking missiles, the hordes take to social media to see who can condemn the madness in the most categorical terms possible. And people like me who are blatantly condemning what happened don't cut it. Why? Because attempting to form a new team isn't an acceptable outcome in the duopoly that got us to this point in the first place. And that's how we find ourselves here, with everyone at each other's throats, even as so many of us fundamentally agree on so much, and even as so many of us want actual, lasting, and vital change that secures all of our rights. Change that will allow us to collectively move forward in much desired peace. See, my main problem in today's American politics is that we spend way too much time arguing over shades of unacceptability. What I mean by that is, like, look at the 2016 election when we had Donald Trump, a clearly unacceptable candidate, and Hillary Clinton, frankly, a clearly unacceptable candidate. And we argued over, well, which is the lesser of two evils? How many times are we going to have this argument? Which is the lesser of two evils? My whole argument with all of these things, whether it's neo-Nazis or white supremacists or terrible people on one side, one extreme, and then the very violent Antifa people that are talking about punching people in the face and all this kind of stuff on the other side, we're arguing over, like, which one of these is better? My argument is that they're both unacceptable. I don't want anything to do with either of them. Now for what you may not want to hear, but need to hear anyway. Identity politics, political violence, and hateful speech, actions, and feelings are not relegated to moronic neo-Nazis and uneducated white supremacists alone. That's what makes these ideas so powerful in contemporary American politics. They've found more ubiquity in more corners of our polity than I think a lot of people would like to admit to themselves. And there are real consequences for that. There are real consequences for stoking violence, for normalizing this Neanderthalic level of discourse. I don't make videos in order to lie to you, and I'm certainly not going to walk through life with blinders on, lying to myself either. The terrible, hateful events that took place in Charlottesville are merely the newest chapter in an ongoing tit-for-tat American saga, egged on by both sides. Yes, the dreaded both sides, where the political extremes have taken control, where there's little oxygen left for normalcy and moderation, and where everyone has to take an existing side, even if none of those existing sides seem palatable in any way. That's where I stand. That's where many millions of people stand. I'd argue that's where an overwhelming majority of people stand. I see neo-Nazis and I run away in horror, and there to greet me are the people that look like Cobra Vipers who run around talking about assaulting people? No thanks. Meanwhile, what is essentially one long episode of Black Mirror takes place all around us. Cretans absolutely thrive in this sort of attentive atmosphere. Social commentary is rife with one-upping people, rewriting history, nailing people to causes, twisting their words, sowing further dissent, and causing deeper and darker divisions. And I'm not talking about those that actually belong to those groups who should be named and shamed, but everyone else, who amount to innocent bystanders without a political home. Those who are strangely sometimes shamed for not having a political home. Political refugees, as it were, who hate so much of what they're seeing every day of the week from different groups, different angles, and perhaps most paramount, for entirely different reasons. A lot of that might be because when one side does something terrible, the other sides, as it were, act like they didn't do anything to contribute to that environment. It's disingenuous. I'm a grown-up and I can think for myself, so I don't find it that much of a leap to condemn the alt-right movement and Antifa, and any elements within the orbits of both garbage piles. I think using infamous KKK tactics, like firelit night marches, is atrocious and objectively loaded. Just like I think destroying your own school because someone you don't like was going to speak there is an embarrassment to American academia. There are few things more historically, politically, economically, and socially tone-deaf and outright ignorant than proudly flying a swastika and saluting like a Nazi. Hundreds of thousands of our grandfathers died fighting fascism. I can think that, and I can also think that flying the hammer and sickle says a great deal about a person's fundamental lack of intellect that would put them right at home with the neo-Nazis. Thousands of our fathers and grandfathers died fighting brain-dead communists, too. I vociferously condemn racism, sexism, transphobia, and homophobia. I also vociferously condemn calls for violence over speech, even if that speech hurts your feelings, because it adds to the decay of our fragile system. I think the United States has been and should continue to be a shining city on the hill that welcomes people into its arms regardless of race, country of origin, religion, or orientation, just as much as I think the United States should remain a bastion for capitalism, enterprise, and free thought, just as much as I think that the US has every right to say no. It may be hard to grasp, but you can actually feel all of those things at the same time, and in fact, if you do, I'd say you have a pretty objective and realistic grasp on things. If you're not able to feel a collection of feelings like that, well, that's on you. You're almost certainly an ideologue. That's your own baggage, your own cross to bear. Don't put your garbage on all of us. People have made a living twisting other people's words, and mine are never immune. I know I can't please everyone, and frankly, I'm not even interested in trying. I will stand my ground, though, and I will continue to say very loudly and very proudly that I hate extremism in all of its forms. I think it's all vile. I don't think violence is the answer. I don't think bigotry is the answer, and I sure as hell don't think identity politics provide the answer either. I feel for the family and friends of the person who was killed by neo-Nazi scum, just as much as I feel for the person who was brutally assaulted by an Antifa member armed with a bike lock. I don't want anything to do with either disgusting extreme, and if that's not a good enough stance for some people, it ultimately changes nothing for me. And more importantly, it changes nothing for the reality of many of us, who are rallying to fix the problem by lopping off both sickly extremities before they have a chance to infest any more of what's left. The political power is slowly coming our way, slowly seeping to the moderate elements of America, whether you like it or not. See, the fact of the matter is, I hate what the extremes have done to all of us. I hate that this battle is waged in streets and in parks and in all these places at colleges and universities around the United States. And ostensibly it happens in our name. Someone's fighting for us or the other people fight. Neither of you represent what I feel. And I can call bigotry and racism what it is and condemn it, but I can also call violence and all of this kind of stuff that was happening before Charlottesville. I can hate that too. I hate all of this. I hate what it's doing to us as a people. We can break the spell, but it's going to take a way more concerted effort than making into a meme the people who are trying to stand screaming at the top of a platform saying, enough already. I think that if you've been listening to me long enough, long before Colin's Last Stand was even founded, you know where I stand. I believe in the individual and the right of a person to determine his or her course through life as they see fit, so long as they harm no one else and no one else's property. I believe that we are all born equal, regardless of where, when, to whom, or into what circumstances. I believe that ultimately, binding ourselves to rigid groups and walking forward equipped with unbending and unmoving ideologies is destructive. I think both sides, there it is again, both sides, have ideas worth listening to. And I think that when you get close enough to the extremes of both of those sides, you have to stop listening completely, because that's where abject ridiculousness alone exists. But there seems to be some confusion in some corners, so I want to be clearer yet on my positions. If you're a racist, whether you're racist against black people or Middle Easterners or Hispanics, or yes, even white people, we have a problem. If you're sexist, if you hate women, if you want to treat them unequally and unfairly, we have a problem. If you oppose the rights of gay people to live a normal and decent life, or choose to stand in their way of equal protection under the law, we have a problem. If you oppose trans people gaining acceptance in our 21st century society, we have a problem. If you oppose a person's right to freely exercise his or her religion, or no religion at all, like me, we have a problem. If you celebrate the deaths of cops or the deaths of soldiers, we have a problem. If you think you have the right to abridge anyone's speech, or the ability of a person to express him or herself, with threats of violence, intimidation, and deplatforming, we have a problem. If you think violence is a valid political tool except in the absolute most extreme cases not even in the remotest sense happening around us, we have a problem. If you take issue with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, I have a problem with you. I have all sorts of room in my brain, in my heart, and in my body to harbor all of these stances, and when I hear people condemn me for it, I question why they have the inability to feel multiple things at the same time. I'm not sure I'd be so proud of such a glaring character weakness, because that's what it is. There's nothing weaker than rigid ideology that doesn't allow for free and unhindered thought. But I have room in my heart for love too, an infinite amount of room really, because there are so many good, decent, honest, hardworking, and thoughtful people in the world, who at the very least are trying to live a righteous life, take care of themselves and their families, and infringe on no one else. Many simply go through the motions carefully, quietly, and with honor, with no ill intentions, and they should be applauded. These are the kinds of people that I think are ultimately attracted to something like Colin's Last Stand, and I take a lot of pride in that. I take a lot of pride in the fact that we can call a spade together, even if it's not the popular or obvious stance. And today, let's call a spade a spade. What happened in Charlottesville was a shameful display of the worst elements of American society, miserable racists, bigots, and fearmongers. But it's hardly an isolated incident. Remember Berkeley, Ferguson, Baltimore? Remember the congressman shot by a Bernie Sanders supporter? The death resulting from people standing up to anti-Muslim bigotry on a train? The nightclub that was targeted because it was a place gay people could feel safe? What the bigoteers and racists alike seem unable to grasp is that the world is far more complicated than they think it is. But the common thread is violence and hate, and I proudly stand against all of it, and I think we need to pull back from the abyss and learn to talk again. So the question now is, what are we going to do about all of this? And how many events will we have to witness? How many will we have to condemn? And how many people will have to be killed before we come to our senses again, eagerly push away the extremes no matter from which direction they come at us from, and find goodness and decency with each other again? Anyone who thinks this is the end is fooling themselves. This cycle of despicable bigotry and violence perpetrated by multiple parties will only get worse until good, normal, law-abiding, and decent people stand up and say no. Most of us lean one way or the other, but still stand a light year away from the worst elements of our so-called side. Maybe the silver lining of this thick, gray Charlottesville cloud could be reminding us that extremism in all of its forms is tearing us apart. Instead of othering each other, instead of feeding into the hate that's so glorified at the polar extremes, and instead of trying to win a never-ending game of one-upsmanship, we could instead try to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. Because this war of escalation is becoming too real to stomach, and I, for one, am tired of this fruitless ping-pong game where no one is ever at fault for anything, ever, except for the side you hate, where everything apparently happens in a vacuum, even though that's obviously not true, even if the facts hurt your feelings. So I'll ask again, where are the adults? And this time I'll answer it. We are. You and I. So let's get to work. Well, that's it for today's Colin's Last Stand. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I will be very interested, as I said at the top of the show, to hear what you think in the comments below. So leave a comment. I'm usually down there chatting with you. Keep it respectful to me and to others. We have a nice community here brewing at CLS. I would also appreciate if you went over to Patreon at patreon.com/ColinsLastStand to give me $1 or $5 or $10 a month, whatever you can, considering that this product is free for all, whether you support Colin's Last Stand on Patreon or not. You'll notice that there are no ads even running on YouTube. There are no ads on this show. There are no product placements, nothing like that. CLS is all about free for all, but it is supported by subscribers. So if you like what you see, please consider it. And as always, I thank you so much for your attention, for your kindness, for your support, and for all the rest. I feel like this episode is important. I hope you feel the same. Again, I'll be reading your feedback, so keep it coming. I will see you for the next episode of Colin's Last Stand. Until then, keep on learning.